The sound that ripped through the placid Saturday morning air of Maple Creek Estates wasn't a bird, a lawnmower, or the cheerful chime of an ice cream truck. It was a shriek, a raw, primal, pterodactyl in distress shriek that vibrated the very molecules of the meticulously manicured airspace. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world being violated by a muddy, gushing, bright yellow fire hose. "What have you done?" Brenda, our neighborhood's self-appointed queen and reigning Grand Marshal of the Homeowners Association, stood on her immaculate porch, a portrait of pure, unadulterated fury. Her hand, clutching a phone, trembled. Her face, usually a serene mask of condescending placidity, was a twisted canvas of rage. I took a deliberately slow sip of my coffee, leaning against the warm hood of her gargantuan white SUV. The vehicle, which I privately referred to as the pristine pavement princess, now had a bold new accessory. The heavy-duty hose, my instrument of glorious, malicious compliance, lay draped across its gleaming hood like a conqueror's banner, pumping a torrent of glorious, high-pressure water toward the parched expanse of my front yard. "Morning, Brenda," I said, my voice an island of calm in her ocean of outrage. "Lovely day for hydroseeding, isn't it? The sun is really cooperating." Her eyes, hidden behind sunglasses the size of small dinner plates, were fixed on the hose. A few errant drops of muddy water had beaded on her windshield, and she looked at them as if they were acid. You put your filthy hose on my vehicle?" Each word was a tiny, venomous dart. "Technically," I clarified, taking another sip of coffee, "it's a rented hose, and I wouldn't say it's on your vehicle so much as it's traversing it. It's a temporary bridge, a necessary aqueduct to facilitate the beautification of my property. A project, I might add, that will ultimately increase property values for us all." I added a little nod, as if sharing a savvy business tip. This beautiful, chaotic tableau wasn't a spontaneous act of madness. Oh no. It was a carefully considered, meticulously executed response to an act of profound suburban aggression that had occurred a full 12 minutes prior. This was simply the glorious, gushing consequence. Life in Maple Creek Estates was, for the most part, a study in beige. The houses were beige. The mailboxes were a slightly darker beige. The collective personality of the neighborhood was a shimmering, oppressive beige. When my graphic design firm restructured me into unemployment 3 months ago, my wife and I had just closed on this house. It was our slice of the American dream. Or at least the beige-colored HOA-regulated version of it. For the first few weeks, I was adrift. My days, once filled with deadlines and color palettes, stretched before me in an endless expanse of daytime television and existential dread. The landscaping project was my salvation. It was a plan, a purpose. I would transform our cookie-cutter lot into a vibrant, colorful oasis, a middle finger to the monochromatic tyranny of the neighborhood aesthetic. My first inkling that this would be an uphill battle came in the form of a crisp, white envelope left on my doorstep. It was from Brenda, of course. Inside was a Polaroid picture of my recycling bin, which was, according to the passive-aggressive note written in a looping, aggressive cursive, a full 3 inches beyond the approved curb placement line, as per Bylaw 4.7c. She had used a ruler in the photo for emphasis. A ruler. My second run-in was even more direct. I was planting some rose bushes when her shadow fell over me. I looked up to see her standing there, clipboard in hand, a look of profound disappointment on her face. "Those are blaze of glory roses, aren't they?" she'd asked, her tone suggesting I was planting triffids. Yeah. They're supposed to be a really vibrant red." Vibrant is not an approved adjective in the Maple Creek Estates landscaping guidelines, she'd informed me, tapping her clipboard. Section 9, paragraph 2. Floral arrangements should be of a subdued and complementary nature. These are aggressive. She'd made a note on her clipboard and walked away, leaving me to contemplate the existential aggression of my rose bushes. This was the environment I was operating in, a place where a ruler was a weapon and flowers could be confrontational. My project wasn't just about landscaping anymore. It was about reclaiming a small patch of individuality in the beige wilderness. And today was the day for the main event, hydro-seeding. It was the foundation of my rebellion, and it required one thing above all else: water. Lots and lots of water. The problem began with my spigot. It produced a sad, pathetic trickle of water, barely enough to wash a car, let alone nourish an entire lawn's worth of seed, mulch, and fertilizer. My grand vision was dying of thirst before it even had a chance to live. My frustration grew with the rising sun. The bags of hydro-seed mix sat on my driveway, mocking me with their potential. The rental aerator looked on, a silent, judgmental beast. And then I saw it. Gleaming under the morning sun at the edge of my property line, a squat, powerful, beautiful fire hydrant. It was a beacon of hope, a promise of glorious, unrestrained water pressure. It was the key to my landscaping salvation. My heart soared. I could practically hear the triumphant music swelling. The music screeched to a halt as a massive, impossibly white SUV turned onto our street. The pristine pavement princess. It moved with the slow, regal arrogance of a land yacht, its tires barely whispering on the asphalt. Brenda was behind the wheel, her silhouette unmistakable. With a casual indifference that spoke of years of unchecked entitlement, she pulled her vehicle directly in front of the hydrant, its rear bumper not 6 inches from the main valve. She had blocked my salvation. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to be a reasonable, functioning member of society. I walked over as she was wresting an oversized tote bag from her passenger seat. "Hey, Brenda, morning," I began, forcing a neighborly smile. "Beautiful day." "It is," she said, not looking at me. "Listen, I have a quick favor to ask. I'm starting this big hydro-seeding project today, and I was wondering if you could just scoot your car forward a few feet. You're kind of parked right on top of the hydrant." She finally turned to me, her sunglasses hiding her eyes, but not the condescending tilt of her head. "I'm just running inside to grab my HOA binder. I'll be 2 minutes. The hydrant has been fine for 30 years. I think it can survive a few more minutes without being molested." "Right, but the thing is, I kind of need to, access it for the project," I pressed, gesturing towards my sad pile of landscaping supplies. Her head tilted even further. "Absolutely not," she said, her voice dripping with the finality of a royal decree. "Civilian access to municipal water outlets is strictly against City Ordinance 4.17b, and, more importantly, HOA Bylaw 12.3. It's all in the welcome packet you received upon closing. Perhaps you should read it sometime." She turned and sashayed towards her front door, leaving me standing in the street, slack-jawed at the sheer, unadulterated audacity. It was the condescending mention of the welcome packet that did it. That was the spark. 2 minutes. That's what she'd said. I watched the clock on my phone. 2 minutes became 5. 5 became 8. At the 10-minute mark, something inside me snapped. The little voice of reason that usually tempered my more impulsive instincts was drowned out by a chorus of sarcastic, rebellious imps chanting, "Do it, do it, do it!" My hydro-seed mix was congealing. The sun was beating down. My dream of a lush green lawn was turning into a nightmare of clumpy, expensive mulch. And Brenda was inside, probably alphabetizing her HOA violations, completely unbothered. That's when I remembered the gift. My Uncle Sal, a retired firefighter with a heart of gold and a sense of humor forged in 1,000 burning buildings, had once given me a ridiculously large, heavy, cast-iron hydrant wrench. "For urban emergencies, kiddo," he'd boomed at my housewarming party. "You never know when you'll need to tap into the grid." We'd all laughed. It had been sitting in the back of my garage ever since, a monument to my uncle's weirdness. I walked to my garage, my steps filled with a newfound purpose. There it was, leaning against a stack of old paint cans. It felt heavy in my hands, solid and powerful. It felt like destiny. I then uncoiled the bright yellow industrial-grade hose I'd rented. It was thick, heavy, and meant for serious business. The walk back to the hydrant was a slow, deliberate march. I felt like a gunslinger approaching a high-noon showdown. The devil on my shoulder was now doing a full-on victory dance. Was this a terrible idea? Probably. Could this escalate things to a ridiculous degree? Almost certainly. Was it going to be one of the most satisfying things I'd ever done in my life? Oh, absolutely. I fitted the wrench to the valve on the hydrant. It was a perfect fit. I took a deep breath and heaved. The valve groaned in protest, a deep, metallic sound that echoed in the quiet street. Then, with a whoosh, the water came. Not a trickle, but a powerful, unrestrained torrent. It was beautiful. Now for the masterpiece. I could have just run the hose around her SUV. But where was the art in that? Where was the poetry? No, this required a statement. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted the gushing hose. I walked to the front of her pristine pavement princess. And with all the care of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact, I gently laid the hose directly across the center of her gleaming white hood. The muddy water flowed over it, a brown river carving a path through a snowy landscape. It wasn't vandalism, it was art. It was malicious compliance in its purest, most elegant form. I stepped back to admire my work. The yellow hose on the white hood was a stunning visual. The gushing water was the perfect soundtrack. I took out my phone and was about to snap a picture for posterity when Brenda's front door creaked open. The shriek followed a moment later. The confrontation was, in a word, biblical. Brenda stormed across her lawn, her face a thundercloud of righteous fury. Curtains twitched in the houses around us. The entire neighborhood, it seemed, was tuning in for the show. "Are you insane?" she screeched, stopping just short of the spray zone. "Calm down, Brenda," I said, holding up my hands in a placating gesture. "You're going to give yourself an aneurysm. It's just water." "It's muddy water, on my car. This is vandalism. I am calling the police. You will be arrested. You will be sued. You will be ruined." Her voice escalated with each proclamation, reaching a fever pitch that probably registered on the Richter scale. "Let's break this down logically," I said, adopting my most reasonable tone. "First, your car is not damaged. It is merely damp. A quick trip to the car wash will solve that. Second, as I tried to explain earlier, your vehicle was illegally parked, obstructing emergency access to this hydrant. I, on the other hand, am engaged in a perfectly legal home improvement project." "You can't just put a fire hose on someone's property," she sputtered. "Well, you parked your property on public access property, creating a bit of a legal and logistical gray area, wouldn't you say?" I countered. I was actually enjoying this. The mental gymnastics were exhilarating. From across the street, I saw old Stan Henderson step out onto his porch. He was a quiet widower who mostly kept to himself. He leaned against his porch railing, a small smile playing on his lips, and gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a medal of honor. I had an ally. Brenda, realizing she was losing the public debate, retreated to her ultimate weapon, the telephone. That's it. I'm calling them. You just wait. She stomped back to her porch, phone pressed to her ear, presumably giving a very frantic and one-sided account of the morning's events to a bewildered 911 operator. The hose continued its steady, gushing rhythm, a beautiful liquid metronome counting down the moments to the next phase of our suburban war. About 20 minutes later, 2 official vehicles arrived. The first was a beat-up Ford F-150. The logo for Gus's Green Thumb Landscaping faded on the door. Gus, a man whose face was a road map of long, hot summers, climbed out. He was chewing on an unlit cigar. He took in the scene. The hose, the SUV, Brenda glaring daggers from her porch, and just slowly shook his head. "Morning, Leo," he grunted, his voice like gravel rolling downhill. What in the name of all that is holy is this?" "Creative water routing solution, Gus," I said cheerfully. "The HOA president here was kind enough to provide a handy, elevated bridge for my hose. Very community-minded of her." Gus stared at the SUV, then back at me. "Right. Look, kid, I just deliver the mulch and cash the check. I ain't equipped to be an accessory to whatever felony this is." Before I could argue the legal classification of my actions, the second vehicle arrived. A black and white patrol car. 2 officers emerged. One was young, eager, with a fresh haircut and a crisp uniform. This was Officer Davis. The other was older, with a weary slump to his shoulders and a mustache that had clearly seen things. This was Officer Miller. Brenda descended from her porch like an avenging angel. "Officers, thank goodness! This man," she pointed a trembling finger at me, "has vandalized my vehicle and is illegally using city water." Officer Davis puffed out his chest, ready to dispense some justice. Officer Miller just looked tired. "Ma'am, can you please tell us what happened?" he asked, his voice a monotone of practiced patience. Brenda recounted her version of events, a dramatic tale of unprovoked aggression and wanton destruction. I waited patiently. When she was done, Officer Miller turned to me. "Sir, your side?" "Well, officer," I began, "I'm working on a large landscaping project. My own water pressure is inadequate. I attempted to politely ask my neighbor to move her vehicle, which was, and still is, parked in direct violation of City Ordinance 11.34A, which prohibits parking within 15 feet of a fire hydrant. I produced the printout from my back pocket. She refused, so I was forced to improvise a solution that would allow me to continue my work without damaging her property." Officer Miller took the paper and read it. Officer Davis peered over his shoulder. "So, you're saying you did this because her car was in the way?" Officer Davis asked, a hint of accusation in his tone. "I'm saying her illegally parked vehicle presented a logistical challenge, which I overcame," I corrected gently. Officer Miller handed the paper back to me. He walked over to the SUV, inspected the hose, and then looked at the paint underneath. He turned back to Brenda. "Ma'am, I don't see any damage to your vehicle, and it does appear you are illegally parked." But the mud!" she wailed. "Ma'am, we can't arrest someone for making your car a little dirty," Officer Miller said, his voice straining to remain professional. He turned to me. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you'd turn the water off so your neighbor can move her car. And in the future, please find a less confrontational way to handle neighborly disputes." I gave him a solemn nod. "Will do, officer." They left without issuing any tickets, though Officer Miller gave Brenda a very stern look. Gus, who had watched the entire exchange with a mixture of horror and amusement, finally let out a low whistle. "Kid, you got balls of brass." The hose remained in place. Defeated in the field, Brenda retreated to her command bunker, the HOA office. The next morning, the first salvo of the paper war arrived. a crisp white envelope containing a violation notice. $50 fine for unauthorized use of common property water resources. I laughed and pinned it to my fridge. It was the first of many. A few days later, $100 fine for unapproved landscaping modifications, hydroseed color deemed inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic. My vibrant green was apparently an affront to their beige sensibilities. Then, $75 fine for creating a public nuisance, hose. I started a collection on my refrigerator. They were badges of honor. But I knew I couldn't just play defense. I needed to go on the offensive. So I spent an entire weekend poring over the HOA bylaws, a document so dense and mind-numbing it could be used as a sedative. And in its tedious pages, I found my weapon. Bylaw 6.4 strictly regulated permanent lawn ornaments, but it was silent on the subject of temporary ones. A quick online search and 2-day shipping later, a 12-foot-tall inflatable pink flamingo arrived at my door. I inflated it in my driveway, a magnificent, ridiculous beast of neon pink plastic. I staked it firmly in the center of my new, inconsistently green lawn. It was glorious. Brenda's reaction was a thing of beauty. I saw her car slow to a crawl as she drove by, her head swiveling in disbelief. The next day, there was no violation for the flamingo. Instead, there was a ticket on Gus's truck for being a commercial vehicle parked on a residential street for more than 4 hours. Gus was furious. "That woman is a menace," he fumed. "Don't worry, I've got this," I said. I marched over to Brenda's house, HOA binder in hand, and pointed to Bylaw 15.1. Exemption for necessary construction vehicles actively engaged in on-site projects. She read it, her face turning a shade of red that clashed horribly with my rose bushes and slammed the door in my face. The ticket mysteriously vanished. The flamingo became my silent, inflatable soldier. I'd put it up in the morning and take it down at night, a daily ritual of petty defiance. The war of bylaws was in full swing, and I was giving as good as I got. Brenda, unable to defeat me in single combat, decided to bring in the entire army. A fluorescent pink flyer appeared on every door in the neighborhood. Emergency HOA meeting. Urgent matters to be discussed. The subject, I knew, was me. The community center clubhouse was packed. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and suburban tension. Brenda stood at the front, flanked by the other 2 board members. Gary, a nervous man who nodded at everything Brenda said, and Mrs. Henderson, a sweet old lady who seemed to think this was a book club meeting. Brenda delivered a passionate, near-tearful speech about the sanctity of rules, the breakdown of order, and the rogue element that threatened to plunge Maple Creek Estates into a state of anarchic chaos. She was talking about me. When she finished, to a smattering of nervous applause, all eyes turned to me. I stood up and walked to the front, carrying my laptop. "Thank you, Brenda, for that dramatic reading," I began. "I've also prepared a short presentation." I connected my laptop to the projector. The first slide read, "Maple Creek Estates, a study in selective enforcement." A gasp went through the room. Brenda's face went pale. The next slide was a picture of her SUV parked in front of the hydrant. Click a picture of Gary's unapproved garden gnome. Click. A picture of another neighbor's peeling paint, a clear violation of the maintenance bylaw. Click, click, click. I had spent the last week documenting every minor infraction committed by Brenda and her allies. My presentation was a meticulously crafted indictment of her hypocritical reign. When I finished, there was a stunned silence. Then, from the back of the room, Stan Henderson stood up. "She fined me $50 last year because my granddaughter's chalk drawings on the sidewalk were unapproved graffiti," he said, his voice steady. Suddenly, the floodgates opened. One by one, other residents stood up, sharing their own stories of Brenda's petty tyranny. The meeting devolved from a trial against me into a referendum on her leadership. She stood at the front, speechless and exposed, her authority crumbling around her. Humiliated and stripped of her public support, Brenda went for the nuclear option. She abandoned the HOA bylaws and went straight to the city. A week after the disastrous meeting, a city official in a stiff uniform showed up at my door and slapped a bright red stop work order on my front window. My blood ran cold. This was no longer a game. According to the document, an anonymous complaint had been filed regarding potential violations of municipal zoning codes related to unpermitted grading and residential water runoff. It was all bureaucratic nonsense, of course, but it was effective. My project was dead in the water, and I was facing the threat of thousands of dollars in fines. I spent the next 2 days in the labyrinthine corridors of the city planning department. It was a bureaucratic hellscape of long lines, indifferent clerks, and an endless array of color-coded forms. I was bounced from department to department, each one telling me I needed a different piece of paper from the last one. The humor of the situation was fading fast, replaced by a cold, gnawing anxiety. Brenda had found a way to hit me where it hurt, turning the soulless gears of bureaucracy into her personal weapon. Gus's crew couldn't work. My yard was a half-finished mess, and my savings were dwindling. For the first time, I felt like I might actually lose. Just as my spirits hit rock bottom, the neighborhood fought back. Stan Henderson was the first to arrive, showing up at my door with a 6-pack of beer and a look of grim determination. "Heard what she did," he said. "That woman has no soul. We're not going to let her get away with it." He was followed by Mrs. Davison from down the street, who brought over a still warm apple pie and the story of how Brenda had tried to get her fined for having a welcome mat that was deemed excessively whimsical. Then came Mr. Kim, a quiet lawyer who lived 3 houses down. He'd had his own run-in with Brenda over his kid's basketball hoop. He offered to look over the city's order, pro bono. That weekend, Stan held a secret meeting in his backyard. It was a motley crew of about 20 neighbors, all of whom had been on the receiving end of Brenda's tyranny. Over cheap beer and hot dogs, the Maple Creek Liberation Front was born. Our plan was simple, elegant, and beautifully petty. We would fight her with the very weapon she had used against us: malicious compliance, but this time en masse. The following Saturday morning, the neighborhood transformed. In a coordinated act of silent rebellion, nearly every house on the street sprouted a 12-foot-tall inflatable pink flamingo. Excessively whimsical, welcome mats appeared on every doorstep. Bird feeders of every shape and size, all technically in violation of some obscure bylaw, were hung from trees. Brenda was overwhelmed. She drove up and down the street, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. She couldn't possibly write up 24 violations at once. Her clipboard, once a symbol of her power, was now useless. The resistance had shown its strength. Her reign was over. The climax came at the annual neighborhood potluck BBQ. The atmosphere was festive, almost celebratory. The resistance had won. Brenda was there, but she was a pariah, sitting alone at a picnic table, radiating an aura of bitter defeat. In a final, spectacular act of hubris, she parked her pristine pavement princess in the exact same spot, directly in front of the fire hydrant. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to reassert her dominance, a silent, "I still do what I want." And that's when the universe decided to deliver the punchline. A grease fire erupted from an unattended grill. It wasn't a raging inferno, but it was big enough and smoky enough to cause a panic. Someone called 911. Within minutes, the wail of sirens filled the air. A massive fire engine rounded the corner and screeched to a halt. The fire chief, a man with a mustache that could intimidate a grizzly bear, took one look at the situation. The small fire, the crowd of onlookers, and the massive white SUV blocking the hydrant. He didn't hesitate. "Engine 4 to dispatch," his voice crackled over the radio. "We have an obstructed hydrant at the scene. Vehicle is a white SUV, license plate HOA LDR. We're going through." The entire neighborhood watched, mesmerized, as two firefighters grabbed halogen bars from the truck. With two swift, brutal, and incredibly satisfying blows, they smashed out the driver's side and passenger's side windows of Brenda's SUV. Glass sprayed across the perfect lawn. Without a word, they fed their thick, heavy hose right through the cab of her precious vehicle. A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by a wave of hushed, delighted whispers. I stood there, a half-eaten burger in my hand, and locked eyes with Stan. We both broke into wide, uncontrollable grins. Brenda let out a choked, strangled sound, the final, pathetic whimper of a fallen tyrant. It was perfect. It was poetic justice, delivered by the very hydrant that had started it all. The aftermath was swift. The fire was extinguished in minutes. The city slapped Brenda with a fine for obstructing a fire hydrant that made my little HOA violations look like pocket change. Humiliated beyond recovery, she was forced to resign from the HOA board. The stop work order on my project was lifted. A few weeks later, my backyard was complete. It was a lush, vibrant oasis, a riot of color in the heart of beige land. Stan, Gus, and I sat on my new patio, drinking cold beers and admiring our handiwork. We watched as a moving van pulled up to Brenda's house. Her SUV, still sporting two boarded-up windows, was already gone. I raised my bottle in a toast. "To malicious compliance," I said. Stan and Gus clinked their bottles against mine. A new era had dawned in Maple Creek Estates. An era with more color, more common sense, and thankfully, a lot more flamingos.